It's my pleasure.
Sorry.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. My pleasure to introduce, for any of you who don't know her, Mrs. Jess Rees, who is our theory moderator. And tonight she's going to be telling us about some exciting new developments with the way that you can teach and your candidates can sit the theory component of the ASB and LSB diplomas. So, Jess, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to tinker around getting the screen share right. So do amuse yourselves, won't you? None of this will be new to so many of you. Oh, and of course, I suppose you want to see the right thing. Right, so hopefully now you're seeing what I'm seeing, the rectangular view that says Viva Voce exams. Are we all good so far?
Yes, great.
Well, hallelujah. How sad it is, however, that not a great deal has changed since I saw so many of you a couple of weeks back going over some of this for our examining team. So dear Meredith and you others still stuck up there in Tamaki Makaurau and now other parts of the country, we are still thinking of you. Trust me, we see you, we don't forget you, and we look forward to when we can be reunited, perhaps over one of these wonderful Viva Voce exams that we finally have, and how marvelous that is. So I'll just begin by having a look over what we're going to cover tonight. For those of you who did attend the examiner session, a lot of it is the same. Do feel free to challenge, interject, add as needed. We'll begin by taking a look at the rationale for the changes that have been made and quickly go through the syllabus updates. Many of you will have seen those now either on the website or in the information that has come out from our wonderful National Office team. We'll talk about what the exams will look like, what the exam format is going to be, and what your candidates can expect. Then we'll go on and look at the kinds of discussion skills that we're hoping that they will cultivate to bring with them to these exams and to succeed in them. And towards the end, we'll have a quick look at how we'll place the grade and what you can expect in terms of feedback from those reports. It's really important, of course, that we have your questions as we go. Because we're doing the screen share thing, there's so many of us, I'll just pause as we go through and invite those questions. Do as well feel free to type them into the chat bar and I can duck into those as we go through as well. So it is worth covering off the rationale. Speech New Zealand is an oral language organisation. We're helping our nation to communicate. Adding these Viva Voce exams is our way of recognising that that's exactly what we want students to do with their theoretical knowledge as well. So what we're wanting to do is take those candidates and work with them in the same ways, of course, that you're often teaching them. So much of their theoretical knowledge comes directly from you. And it's in that discussion with their teacher that so much of what they are learning can be challenged and brought out and improved. And we're simply asking them really to come along and then share that with us. It's also, of course, the way that they are most likely to then use it in their own practice, whether that's in teaching or performance. So in those ways, we're attempting to create an assessment that is authentic. We're also hoping to create an assessment that gives those candidates who haven't perhaps felt comfortable or confident in a written exam another medium in which to express themselves. They can do all of their theory exams in this mode if they wish. And we know that some students will feel more comfortable in a discussion format than they may have previously with written exams, which of course have a time pressure, and with assignments, which like our other exams have that same rigor around their academic quality and the level of written expression that we demand. So in those ways, we're hoping obviously to increase uptake, but most importantly, to increase our candidates' knowledge base. We know at the moment we've got candidates who are really willing to do their performance diplomas, but they're not always taking the option to do the advanced diploma, even when they're very capable candidates. And what we hope is that by giving them this mechanism to undertake that exam and to work through that process of assessment, that they too will benefit from that theoretical knowledge that you're sharing with them. One of the big changes to the syllabus itself then is that we now expect candidates to be able to apply the knowledge that they have gained. So where previously some exams have been purely knowledge-based, so for example, the Shakespeare or New Zealand literature papers in speech and drama, those now also require the candidate to be able to apply their knowledge, whether that's to their own performance or to their practice as a teacher. So I just couldn't quite resist that sweet little quote there. Education without application is just entertainment. So to all papers, both syllabi at both levels, they must be able to make some relation to either performance or teaching. To that end, we've added in those criteria, and because these slides will be put out, I've popped those page numbers there so that you can refer to them easily. The references are all the same, those same 3 headings: to be familiar with general source material, to communicate ideas logically and clearly, and to be comfortable in using discussion skills. It's probably worth spending just a couple of minutes on what those actually mean. So to be familiar with general source material, what we're looking for there is an awareness that sources outside of their own teacher exist, whether they're finding those through their own research or through resources that you're providing to them. I can't think of a student in this country that hasn't seen Speak Up. But of course, there's lots of resources that we would expect them to have a passing acquaintance with, in the same way that they would have had to for an online exam or an assignment. So they need to be able to do that. They need to be able to communicate their ideas logically and clearly. Now, that's simply a nod to the same thing that's in the syllabus everywhere else that says it's not just your knowledge that matters, actually it's also your ability to discuss it. So if they can't share that with us in ways that make their knowledge obvious, we're still at a loss to know what that is. And just to really kind of hopefully make that clear for our teachers and our candidates, they need to be comfortable in using discussion skills. It is a discussion that we expect both the examiner and the candidate to be actively participating in. And the candidate has to be confident in guiding that discussion along with the examiner. It's important too to realise that last point that I've noted here. Not all learning criteria under every paper heading are going to be covered off in equal measure in a Viva Voce exam. For starters, there's not time, but we're also aiming for equivalence. It has to be an equal exam to the online exam of an hour and a half and to an assignment. In those papers, they are not asked questions that would cover all of the learning criteria. Even in exams, as you know, they get a choice between which questions they ask. So it's the same here. We accept that candidates are going to have a deeper knowledge of some learning criteria than others. And that comes back to their ability to participate in and guide that discussion. But that is certainly something that examiners are aware of, that the learning criteria are not a simple checklist that must be worked through. They need to have looked at those. They do not need to be able to discuss them each in great detail. So to have a look at the syllabus amendments, just to make sure that it is clear for everybody. So in associate, for both speech and drama and public speaking, in both performance and teaching, only 3 papers are now required. So voice and speech remains compulsory. For teaching students, they must do the teaching papers. For performance students in speech and drama, they must do that paper 5, the conventions, elements, techniques, features one, and they'll have the choice then between Shakespeare or New Zealand literature. Over in public speaking, I'm sad to say we've lost one of my favourite papers. These are the trade-offs we must make. So the critical evaluation of a speech paper is no more. those are skills that we know candidates are still developing. They do it in the practical modules. They've done it through the grades. We know that that is a skill that they have worked on. Certainly for our NCEA students, they do it in English as well. So we're confident that that has still been covered, but that leaves us with a nice clear denunciation of what needs to be done, what is left. At LSB level, the change is even more dramatic. And the key reason for that is to ensure that there is a balance between the amount of theoretical knowledge that we expect our candidates to be able to demonstrate and the amount of practical work that we're able to view. So at LSB now, they will simply do 4 papers, and it's simple. All of the optional papers are no more. And the 4 key core credits that have always been compulsory, that we've always considered to be the most important ones, that all examiners will have been through themselves, that's what remains. The only difference now, and it does allow candidates a little bit more leeway in terms of how they approach those, is that if they opt for an assignment, they can choose to write, well, sorry, they do write, there is no choice, they write the question themselves within the learning criteria. So they choose their area of interest, they choose what they want to research, they submit their question, they work through that with the moderator, and their time starts from the point that that question is approved. So that's just to allow them still to have a bit of say-so over how the process works, even though we're being a little bit more prescriptive about what areas will be covered. So we've whipped through quite a bit. I'm just going to stop there for a moment and come back to the group, take a quick look at the chat, which seems sadly empty, and just make sure everyone's still with me so far. Got any questions that have come up as yet? Meredith.
Well, perhaps what you have shown us now is already on the website. Is it?
The table that I just had up should be on the website.
Right, yes, I haven't looked.
No. That should be on the website. I think it may have come out separately in an email as well, but certainly if anyone's missing it, that's where you can find it.
Right.
And even when you go into the syllabus links on the website now, it is updated in the online syllabi as well. There won't be a reprint, but it is there online.
Of course not. Good.
Oh, goodness me. All right, we'll carry on through. I'm wondering if Pam's trying to say something.
Wrong spot to unmute yourself. I'm just wondering, is there anything on, and I haven't looked myself just recently, on discussion skills on the website? Because I think in the resources, I think that's something that Speech New Zealand needs to have a look at. I'm speaking as a board member and as an examiner and as a teacher there, I suppose.
Yeah, multiple hats.
Yeah.
I think we all agree with that. I know I've spoken with Emma about the possibility of getting some sort of skills-based stuff on the website for our teachers, especially.
And I think that would be really, really useful because we're looking at those discussion skills going in on a deeper level.
Oh,
at
absolutely.
Diploma level, so it's important.
I think too, what I'd love to have by the end of the year is one of our pilot exams available on the website for people to look at. And we haven't, to the best of my knowledge, sought that permission from a candidate yet. But I mean, that of course is a great way for people to see how it can be done. In an ideal world, I suppose we would give them a range of, a pass, a merit, to give that.
But that might take a wee while to gather those.
Well, it might, mightn't it? Yeah. We'll have to see how we go.
Yeah. Thank you, Jess.
All right, we'll keep charging on through, which means I have to do the unwieldy process of going back to the screen share. So just bear with me. It's trying to let me have you all share at once. Can you imagine? There we are. Right, we're just about away. So we're going to talk a little bit about how the exam will flow. You'll be getting the idea by now that the idea is that they flow much like any other exam. They follow the same ethos the examiner examines what they see before them. And in this way, the candidate has quite a lot of responsibility for the success or otherwise of this examination. And this lovely little proverb, I think, puts that perfectly. It is the examiner's role in this situation to adorn the bird. And what we hope is that from there, the candidate soars. So the exam format, again, this might be information that you have already seen come out online, but it's equivalent also in terms of time. At associate level, they will have 20 minutes with the examiner. At LSB level, it'll be 25, and that's the same as the practical modules. At associate level, these can be incorporated in part of the tour, or they can be scheduled for those end of month Zoom tours. At LSB, the intention is for those to be done exclusively on Zoom, and those can be scheduled at a time mutually suitable. So they may not necessarily fall into those end of month Zoom tours. It will depend on the availability of an examiner at the time, and of course, what the candidate's able to do. That gives us a great deal of flexibility for our candidates to make sure that we can best match skills. And that'll be something I suspect that it'll sort of get ironed out. Wouldn't it be great to think we'll have lots of entries this year and be able to really get that all rocketing along? Candidates can sit it alongside another module. I'm not sure that that's something that I personally would encourage a candidate to do, but some, of course, will be very confident and capable of doing that. You as teachers will know, I'm sure, which of your candidates are capable of doing that. But do bear in mind that examiners will be clearly marking the time. So I can see a temptation, for example, to tack on a theory exam to the end of the program, say in speech and drama, which is something that is all too easy to go over time, especially for our most capable candidates. And that discussion section always feels quite short. That is still a 20-minute exam, and the following theory exam would still be a 20-minute exam. They will be treated entirely separately and timed to that effect. They are also solo exams. So this will be new for a lot of our candidates who will be accustomed to coming in groups. But at this stage, at least, they will be sat individually. So if, for example, you were in that situation where you were sending a candidate in to do a Viva Voce exam following a module exam, the other students would depart and you'd be left with that candidate, and you could swap in and out as required. The candidate may, of course, bring material in with them. This again is just to keep it equivalent with our other exams. So for an online exam, obviously they might have information with them. We don't monitor that or attempt to. We simply seek a declaration that the work is their own. The assignments obviously are research-based, so again, they've got wide access to a range of resources. What we don't want, and this is probably self-evident, but I'll say it anyway, what we don't want is a candidate, struggling in with all their books and spending all their time flicking through their pages trying to find the right bit. So far, the pilot exams that we've done have been on Zoom, and that, of course, reduces that sense of, I've got so much with me from the examiner's point of view. Certainly, students have had notes and they've had resources, and they've been able to look at the title of a TED talk that they've viewed. They've been able to look at the author of a book that they have read. Those sorts of things. If they're wanting to bring that information in with them, they're more than welcome to. It is simply that need to recognise maintaining the flow of the discussion, that is the focus, rather than seeking out a page number reference, which is no good to anybody. So this discussion that I keep going on about, I think it's high time we got on to what that is actually going to look like. So for clarity, the discussion is entirely question and answer. At associate level, 20 minutes is dedicated to that. There is no presentation, there is no talk, there's no impromptu task. It is simply an extended discussion. In that way, an extended version of those discussion sections of modules that candidates are already preparing for. It will feel very similar to them and to the examiner as that. We just have more time to do it, which is wonderful. If only we had more time all the time. So a skilled candidate will guide that discussion for their own benefit. It will move through the same stages as any discussion we're familiar with. Those initiation stages are going to sound to our candidates like, what have you enjoyed about this particular paper? What made you choose this one, if it's an optional one? Was there anything surprising for you in this paper? And those are questions that are designed to allow the candidate an opportunity to say, yes, what I was really interested in was this. I really liked that. And those are all clues to the examiner. That's what I'm listening for. That's what we're going to talk about. That's pertaining to this learning criteria. And away we go from there. For examiners, of course, there is then that challenge that it's an active listening exercise for both parties. So we're not going to be in a position where we can provide sample questions. We're not going to be in a situation where we have checklists. There's not really an element of pre-preparation in terms of how the discussion can go, other than that process of give and take. Examiners then will be very sure, as they always are, that the role is not to catch out our candidates. What the examiner will be doing for your candidates is attempting to tease out the ideas, to let the candidate have their stage, to share those ideas, and in reaching out to find where the boundaries of their knowledge are, allowing the candidate, if you like, to colour in right up to those lines of where that is, so that we're hopefully hearing all those interesting things and the ways that they've sought to apply them or believe that they will apply them in the future. So that's how we sort of see that participation contribution stage there of the exam working. And I'll talk a little bit more about the kinds of questions that they can expect there in a little while. Towards the end of the exam, examiners will be encouraged to check in with the candidate, sort of that 15-minute mark for an associate, around the 20-minute mark for a licentiate. There's so much to cover. We've talked about this and this. Was there anything else you were really wanting to share? So that they have that opportunity still to jump in and say, well, actually, yeah, gosh, I read this and it was really great and I just wanted to tell you about it. If they don't, of course, then the exam can just keep proceeding according to the examiner's own ideas. So to think about, oh, that's gone skew with, how's that? To think then about what those questions might look like. What can your candidates expect to hear? What kinds of questions are they going to get? And now we're back over here. They're going to get open-ended questions, questions that seek to elicit their ideas, their knowledge, questions that seek their opinion and their reflection on it. You'll be hearing a lot of the same words now as we apply in the Flexi syllabus. It is not a purely reflective discussion. The examiner is interested in the learning criteria, not just in the candidate's personal response to those learning criteria. What can be useful for a candidate, and we've seen this already in the pilot exams, is if they have some definite exemplars to draw down on. So for our performance students in either public speaking or speech and drama, if they have a performance or two in mind, even when it is not strictly speaking in the syllabus, things that they have in their mind, yes, I've seen that play, yes, I've given that talk, or I have seen this talk given, and that they can relate their knowledge to that. That's obviously been really helpful for those students who have completed those pilot exams so far. The candidate should also expect that unproductive discussion will be challenged. That is not to say that a candidate may not sometimes end up drawing in information that's superfluous, but candidates will not be encouraged to simply soliloquize their way through an exam. That's obviously unhelpful, and it would lead then to candidates who are essentially just able to prepare a 20-minute talk. That's not what we want. We want a discussion. So the types of things your candidate might hear in that situation are, I'm sure, the same sorts of strategies that you apply when they try it in the classroom. Oh, you've obviously enjoyed that. Now we'll move on and talk about da-da-da-da-da-da. Yes, I've understood that you'd got a handle on that. Perhaps now you could tell me about those sorts of things. Your candidate should also expect to hear from the examiner an effort to summarize and to connect ideas. We've talked about this, you've mentioned this. I'd really like now to think about how that relates to this concept. And those are all skills then where the candidate also really has to be listening carefully, and they've got to be prepared to question and to clarify as needed. That's part of the discussion. Certainly one pilot that's been undertaken so far, there was a lot of clarification. That in itself probably indicates that the questioning wasn't quite spot on enough. I can be critical because it was me. And that's important, that the candidate has the confidence to say, do you mean? The tricky thing there from the other side of the table, of course, is to run that line between guiding a candidate and making it either too easy or far too hard for them. We're not in the business of trying to catch them out or find out what they don't know. What we want to be able to do is to guide them in the direction. So again, to draw on that example of an exam that is often tricky, we know that candidates have some difficulty keeping up with what Speech New Zealand means by convention, technique, feature in paper 5 of the Speech and Drama Associate. It's commonly confused. In an online exam, of course, we have no way to give them that feedback until they're receiving their report. In these exams, we can say to them, sounds to me like you might be talking about techniques. I'd really like for you instead to explore a convention. Can you think of any, and move on from there? So it's not a process of correction, but rather of redirection. And we don't want to let them go wrong. That is not the intention. We want to hear what they know. So in these ways, it really is, it's a genuine discussion, and that's what we want candidates to be encouraged to have the confidence to do. That is what learning is. You suddenly understand something you've understood all your life, but in a new way. I know I was repeatedly told that at school, that once I could explain it to somebody else, that's when I really had a true grasp of it. That's what these candidates are getting the chance to do. It's that student that has sat in front of you and said, well, why didn't they just ask me that? Now we are just asking them that, and it really is that simple. I'm going to stop just there and take another question break. Thank you, Niall, for linking that in the chat there for everybody. That's so helpful. Has anything come up for anybody as we've been going along through that?
Do we get any idea of what they're going to be talking about before the exam? So do they submit anything beforehand, or do we just wait till they come in the door in hopes that we've got enough in here to go with it?
Yeah, that's entirely the intention. Yeah, there's nothing to be submitted in advance at all. The examiner, of course, will know which exam they're entering. So it won't simply say on the timetable Viva Voce. It will have which paper and which syllabus and which whether they're doing teaching or performance. So to that end, I suppose we've got quite a lot of information in that the learning criteria are all there in front of us. I think for everybody, it's a learning curve and a refreshment. I expect lots of questions, and I welcome them all through next year as people look again at some of those learning criteria and think, oh, I wonder what that means. I wonder what was exactly meant to be covered there. Those are all good questions. They are all welcomed, and I know we'll be happy to receive them. And I imagine there may be some robust discussions along the way as we deal with them. That's all to the better. The syllabus as a whole will come out better for it, and we hope our candidates will as well. Does that answer your question, Sandra? Okay, good. Helen?
Yes, just wanting to ask, you mentioned that they'll all be solo exams. I'm assuming that that is so that you don't have two candidates coming out and one saying, oh, the other one had answered all the things they knew and they got us the tricky bits. Is that the only reason why they're solo?
That is a really important reason, I think, but also because the skill of group discussion is a slightly different one. And those of you who have entered students in, for example, those wonderful communicating and leadership exams where they run a group discussion, you know how much there is involved. It's a different skill for everybody. And in some ways, the equivalence of that then to a student who did go in solo versus a student who's doing an assignment, or, you know, they can't do their assignments as groups. So that, I think, is the rationale, twofold, that, yeah, hopefully you reduce concerns like that, but also just maintaining that equivalence. It will be new for some candidates, and it will be interesting, I suppose, to see how they go with doing that. I don't think the organisation has got an issue, say, with there being another student still in the room necessarily, but they're not participating in the discussion, in which case they're most likely to leave. I envisage that most of them will still get done as individual exams. Certainly that would be my strong preference as a teacher, would be to encourage them to do the exams singly, particularly if they've got the opportunity to do them by Zoom, and break up their exam year a bit. But we'll see. It will be interesting. Meredith?
Another thing is, of course, that they're not constrained, restricted to doing a Viva, are they? I mean, if they don't want to do that, well, they can take
Absolutely
one of the other
not.
options.
Absolutely
So
not.
this is giving an extended opportunity, and broadening those horizons.
I'm always staggered that more students don't take up the assignment option. It's a wonderful option. It's only 2,000 words at associate level, only 3,000 words at licentiate level. They have 3 months to do it. They will now write their own questions and be able to follow their own interest. They've got all the time in the world to research and find out and show it to their teacher and show it to their friends, and, you know, get some really good feedback and hone it. If I was a dedicated student and I was determined I wanted distinction, personally, that's what I would choose. And I'm always amazed that more don't. It's increased a lot. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the balance sort of shakes down.
I think a lot will depend on the extent to which our teachers promote it.
Well, as with anything else, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I think Viva is a really exciting option, particularly for those candidates who might not have considered doing the theory before. And I really hope that some of those students, you know, that we start to see them now. Donna.
Sorry.
Yeah, right.
I'm muted now. I've got to get rid of that. Right. Just to add to that, one would assume that the teacher would also take the role of the examiner when teaching, you know, a few weeks beforehand. And Josephine, I think you're there somewhere. I can remember.
Yes.
Joe wrote a really good article for Q years ago, and it was all about discussion skills. And don't look at the examiner like a possum in the headlights. I've always taught that phrase, and it's all about their security and confidence in leading the discussion. And the examiner knows when they're spinning the BS, basically, don't they? Because you can see it.
Yeah.
So it's really, to me, that 20-minute exam is also reliant on practice in the speech lessons, not just knowledge, but practice and learning how to lead the conversation and let the examiner come in occasionally with the open-ended questions, you know, not run the whole thing for 20 minutes. But yeah, and I don't often think that grades 6, 7 and 8, I don't see a lot of brilliant discussion skills. So I think it needs to begin earlier. That's just my opinion on that one.
My latest metaphor is don't treat the examiner like a mother bird going to pop questions into your open mouth.
Oh, bless. Yeah.
You've got to be half of the conversation.
Yeah.
Not just expecting questions and sit there.
Well, exactly.
Otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, on that point, I don't think I've actually said it yet, and hopefully I don't repeat myself when I come across it in a future slide, but it's in the pilot exams that we've run so far. It's been a small number, but in them, I would say that even in an exam that is designed as a discussion exam, candidates don't always recognize the question as the invitation that it is. And we see that in the flexi syllabus as well, in the reflective discussion stages, where you're saying, you know, tell me about, and they're hearing that as a casual inquiry, you know, and you sort of get this response that's very vague.
Yeah.
Actually, everything the examiner is saying, and particularly in these Viva exams, is designed as a questioning method. And I think sometimes they get caught up in that moment, don't they, of the possum in the headlights, or
I love it when
the baby bird.
Yeah. They come out of an exam and they say, and you say to them, "Oh, what did you get asked?" "Oh, you didn't really ask me anything. We just talked about things." I guess that's a sign of a good discussion.
Yeah.
Donna, I just wonder, you made reference to a brilliant article from Josephine. Could you extract that, and would that be helpful to us?
Sure it would.
I don't know. I can't. Years ago, Jo, wasn't it? Maybe.
I can't even remember myself. Might be able to find it. I don't know.
We might be, but yes, because we changed computers, Meredith, about 9 years ago.
Oh, dangerous.
So, yeah, but all of the cues are held at the National Library, so we should be able to find it somewhere.
It sounds as if it would be helpful.
Josephine may have
Write it, Jo.
Have you?
Maybe I've still got it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Denny's just noted in the chat there for us too that she's got 3 associate diploma students doing theory right now. One has chosen to do 3 assignments, 1 2 assignments, and 1 Zoom Viva Voce, and the third to do all 3 as Viva Voce. So there we are.
Bravo. Good teacher.
Very interesting. Dedicated. Right, well, I'll zoom on if I may. Let's see whether we can do it a bit more straightforwardly this time. I think we're away. So the same thing applies as always has to our diploma exams. Competence is what we're looking for at associate level and mastery at licentiate level. And you'll see that reflected in the grades. It's important to say that at associate level, we understand that not all candidates actually have access to their own students to be able to teach. Many of them are lucky to work with teachers who have studios large enough to also have junior students that they can then assist, but it's just not always the way that it works. At associate level, they are sometimes just going to be hypothesizing about what their teaching practice might look like in the future. And in that way, it really is, and as it always has been, it's a learner license for them to stretch themselves in that direction. As we've said already, in determining the grade, we're looking for knowledge, their application of that, and their discussion skills. It all seems quite vague, I think, when you haven't yet seen it in action. So to try to counteract that, we've developed this little rubric that I'm deeply fond of. Now, it probably looks hopelessly small, and I apologize for that. This will go up on the website and will be made available. I'll run through it briefly. So this is only at associate level, as that's primarily what we'll be dealing with. Down the vertical axis there, you'll see the criteria. So understanding of the topic, ability to apply their knowledge, their use of technical terms, their discussion skills, and their familiarity with source material. And then along the horizontal axis there, it shows us what each of those things might look like at each grade level. So available to them at diploma is pass, merit, distinction, or of course, we hope not to use the did not achieve. So in terms of the understanding of the topical material, at a pass level, we're expecting that the candidate has some understanding of the topical material. By merit, they're developing some depth to that understanding. By distinction, they've got a detailed understanding. If they're not achieving the standard, they've got no real understanding of it at all. In the same way, their ability to apply that knowledge. So at pass, they're making some connections. There are connections there. They're not always reliable, and they're not always where we might expect. But by merit, they're making sound connections between their knowledge and their teaching performance. At distinction, those connections are sophisticated. If they're not meeting, not achieving, they're just unable to do that altogether. Use of technical terms is always an interesting one. So at a pass level, they've got just some familiarity with that. So for example, in voice and speech, they might know some of the physiological terms, but by no means all of them. They might use a term like resonance, but not necessarily quite in the right context, or they might confuse it with another technical term that they know. Compare that then to the does not achieve, where they are unfamiliar with it, or they are using it in a way that is just outright incorrect. Obviously, in voice and speech, the difficulty we often have is candidates who struggle to make the distinction between those two, and that is something that can easily lead them into that did not achieve category. If they're achieving merit along that stream, they're understanding those technical terms, but at distinction, they're confident using them and they can expand on them in a meaningful way. So it all just tracks along like that. Discussion skills, at pass, it's a logical answer, but by merit, they're logical and they're clear about it. By distinction, they're also expansive and they can really tell us some more about it. A does not achieve answer, however, would look like a lack of clarity and they're not able to develop or link those ideas. In terms of that source material, we talked a little bit about that right back at the beginning. So at pass, they've got some awareness of that, you know, they can wave their speak up at you and name Sister Leonie, that sort of thing. At merit, their answer is justifying their position in an awareness of those sorts of resources. We do not expect them to be able to tell us the exact place that every exercise that they might be suggesting they might one day do with a student, where that came from. But if they're using a concept, we expect them to be able to link it to the theorist. For distinction, their answer is justifying their position and it provides external source corroboration. This is what I think. I actually saw this when I was looking at this, and this is how that links to that question that you just asked me. Whereas a do not achieve answer, there's just a complete blank about that altogether. You know, this is the typical candidate that says, well, my teacher said. That's lovely. Tell us more. So that little rubric is something that we encourage you to share with the candidate, that teachers will get, that examiners will be using along with the learning criteria in the syllabi to help us place an accurate, useful, meaningful grade. And after that, really, the reports look very much like what you already see. So a blank diploma form, no check boxes or ticks in places or anything like that. It operates exactly as any other performance exam. In the same way, then there's no external moderation process other than the accreditation that examiners already undergo. So most of you will be aware that for online exams and assignments, they are first graded by an experienced theory examiner, and that those grades are then submitted to the theory moderator, who at the moment is me, and we work together to ensure that that grade is standardized across all the responses we get. The decision's been taken that we won't go through that process with Viva Voce exams. It would put our performance examiners and our performance exams in a completely different category and just really, again, reduce that equivalence that we're searching for. So in that way, then we hope that those reports will be available to you and to the candidate, hopefully the next day, certainly along those same timetables that you're used to elsewhere. So that wraps up everything I have to say, but I am hoping that there will be more questions. I can see something's gone back in the chat. Oh yeah, and I mean, isn't that wonderful, Dinny? So Dinny's just pointed out one of her students is going to be doing it from the United States, where she's on scholarship. And I mean, why not? The world is suddenly our oyster, isn't it?
Exactly.
Here we all are.
Yeah, I'm seeing her tomorrow morning to
Oh,
try and figure out when she can do it, because of course there's a time difference.
oh. I'm sure you'll find an examiner understanding about the time difference, Dinny.
Jessica, I think I dozed off at a critical time. Who's doing
You're
the
kind.
assessment for the Viva? Is that a theory examiner or a performance examiner?
All associate exams will be done by associate examiners. So that's why they'll be scheduled into part of the usual tour or anything of that kind.
So a performance examiner?
Yes.
All right. And what about the licentiate?
At LSB, there'll be a smaller pool used who are also accredited Zoom examiners. So you'll appreciate that that takes us down to a relatively small number. And there'll be an attempt then by our wonderful hardworking team at National Office to find an examiner that's not too close, either geographically or otherwise, in most instances, someone who can be impartial in those ways, but also somebody who hopefully has regular, direct, long-term experience with that particular paper so that they can have the discussion and the necessary depth with the candidate.
Right, that's the bit I wanted. So it'll be the theory team that handle that.
There's an unusual sort of crossover between who's involved in the theory team and who's accredited as a Zoom examiner. It will be a bit of a mix and match process as we go through.
Right, okay, thank you.
Jess, one of the things, just going back to that rubric for a moment, on the rubric for the discussion skills, I know everywhere you've got, answers to questions logically or answers to this logically, but it doesn't mention anywhere about candidate guide some of the discussion or initiate some discussion for themselves or areas of discussion. I wonder if that's something that needs to be in there or could be in there.
I think on the licentiate rubric, we see that start to pop up. I think that's been worked into the licentiate one. I mean, I'm heartened by the pilot exam so far and candidates' ability to do exactly that.
I just wonder if there should be something on that rubric just to remind examiners about it.
It would be an interesting thing to try to work in, wouldn't it? Perhaps we can talk more about that. No, and of course we don't want to disadvantage a candidate who isn't quite confident enough yet to do that. I think maybe in that early stages where we're bedding it in, that even if it is just the candidate who's the possum in the headlights, that's ordinarily confident and really capable, but just has that moment, that we can expect some exams that are a lot more question than answer. And those will be the difficult ones for everyone to work through.
Fair enough.
Everyone's so quiet this evening. It's a Tuesday, isn't it? Doesn't it have that effect? You're all so busy through the days at the moment. No. I think it will be a real process as we start to work them through. And I think there will be times in your teaching practice where things come up suddenly or even last minute, and you think, my goodness, gosh, I just, that's next week and we need to know, or it's next month and that's to know. And as I say, we welcome your questions whenever they occur, and we will all be the better for them. Niall, I can just see there, just to confirm, for fellowship exams, Viva is not an option. So we've rejigged the fellowship exams. I haven't talked about that, but we're down to 2 modules, aren't we, for both syllabi again, both teaching and performance again. And the nod there really to Viva Voce exams is that now, instead of in the research module, instead of simply having to present that as a written, it was previously called a thesis, we're now calling it an extended research assignment. Instead of that extended written project, it can now be presented as an extended recorded lecture. And so that's an attempt to bring that in there. So Robin, when does this start? So it'll start in earnest next year. And I mean, as I say, I hope for lots of entries to have to take us through that process then. But we are running some pilot exams this year. So we've done 3. Denny, I see there, you're asking about early to mid-December. Absolutely. As part of this, roll up our sleeves, figure it all out. We have had students who have been part way through an associate diploma and who are desperate, of course, to finish this year under the new requirements. And so, we really want to see those students able to get the results that they deserve. So for those unusual circumstances, those, as you say, who might just want to get those school exams done at the end of this really tough year, absolutely. There's always someone, isn't there? Isn't Zoom great? Remember when we had to have a room and line it all up and make it happen? But this is much simpler. National Office watching this back might not love me for saying that, but yes, we'll always make it work. And they're wonderful at making that happen. I think they're all happy, Helen. Oh, but she's muted.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jess, for running us through this evening. It's certainly exciting. I think it's the direction that Speech New Zealand is going, and offering the candidates more flexibility in what they do, whether it's the syllabi or the way that they actually sit the exam. And we can tell that you're very enthusiastic about this, and I'm sure that enthusiasm is going to help it bed in and work really well for students and teachers. So thank you very much for sharing it with us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I got to play host this evening, so I'm just going to sit here until the end. And if anyone does want to just, shoot the breeze, then I will just keep the meeting open, but I'll stop the recording now. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you, Jess.
Oh, and we're about to get that dreadful